Hey there, this is Jared Giannatasio with PayPros, and this is the Maine HR Compliance Series. Last week, I asked you to give me your questions that you had for the Maine Department of Labor, and I want to thank everyone that sent in questions. I narrowed it down to a top 5 questions that it seemed like most people were concerned about. And this morning, I drove up to Augusta and sat down with Scott Cotnoir of the Maine Department of Labor. And here were his answers to your top 5 questions. So the first question: what's the number one reason why the Department of Labor is called in to do an audit for a company?
Yeah, the majority of the complaints that my division receives involve unpaid wages. Typically, an employer fails to pay an employee when they get done in full for all wages earned.
How important is it to have a system that keeps records of hours of employees worked and what they were paid? And what do you look for in a system?
Right. State and federal laws require that employers keep records, payroll records and time records for at least 3 years. Failure to comply with these requirements will expose the employer to potential fines being levied by the Department of Labor.
Okay.
What we look for in a system is the timekeeping and payroll record system should reflect actual start times of the day, end times of the day, should have the ability to record break times that employees have taken.
Okay.
The payroll records should have the date of the pay period, the hours worked, itemized deductions, and gross earnings.
Does it make a difference if it's kept electronically versus in paper?
No, the employer can choose whatever medium best suits them. It could be as simple as hours written on a calendar.
Right.
But it needs to, like I said, it should show actual start times, end times, any breaks that are taken. The employer should be able to align that with a specific employee. Electronic obviously is better, but not every employer is going to have an electronic system.
Right. Sure, absolutely. So when a company has employees that are paid at different rates for different tasks or different jobs, and they qualify for overtime, how should that be calculated?
Overtime in Maine is based on 1.5 times the employee's regular hourly rate.
Okay.
The regular hourly rate includes all earnings, commissions, bonuses. So all earnings that they've received for work performed in that week.
Right.
You take the total earnings for the week divided by the total hours worked to come up with what's called the average hourly rate, which is the regular rate.
Right.
Half of that rate is then multiplied by the number of hours worked to come up with the actual overtime that's owed.
Right. Okay. So if a company has a mandatory training or some kind of mandatory activity that's not work in an employee's job description, nor does the employer have the option of paying them or not?
If an employer requires an employee to attend a mandatory training or activity, whether it's job related or not, has no bearing. If it's required by the employer, then it needs to be paid. It's compensable. The time spent in that activity is compensable. There are 4 criteria that need to be met in order for the activity not to be paid. The first would be the activity is outside normal business hours. The second is it's voluntary. The employer doesn't require it, but it's voluntary. It's not job related. And finally, no other work is being concurrently performed during that activity.
Right. Okay. And so what are the rules governing when an employee travels for business?
Whether or not time spent in travel is compensable depends on all factors. Typically, an employee that commutes from home to work and then from work back to home at the end of the day is considered normal commuting time, and it's not compensable.
Right.
An employee that works traveling as part of their job duty from job site to job site throughout the day, all of that time spent traveling is compensable. It's considered time worked and needs to be paid.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott, for that information. If you have any other questions for Scott, we'll be interviewing him in the future. We also interviewed Stephen Greeley, also from the Department of Labor, but for the Safety Works division that handles workers' comp audits. So any questions that you have about workplace safety or anything like that, please let us know. We're also planning to extend the HR compliance seminar series into November. Of course, our last one we were telling you is wage and hour in October. I think we're going to do a workplace safety one in November. We don't have a location or an exact date for you yet, but we will. So any questions that you have along workplace safety, definitely let us know. Next week, our next adventure is going to be, we're going to sit down with Amy Parker, who's the state liaison for SHRM.